Outstanding lies the motivational speaker. Act 1. The story begins. Chapter 1. The interview of a lifetime. The office was designed to impress. Everything about it screamed power, wealth, and control, from the floor to ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, to the strategically placed sculptures that likely cost more than Clara's entire salary. The air carried a faint scent of polished leather and aged whiskey, an intentional mix of old money prestige and modern dominance. Clara Morton stood just inside the doorway, gripping her recorder as her eyes swept across the room. Ethan Vale sat behind a dark oak desk, poised like a king on his throne. He wasn't checking emails or reviewing notes. He was watching her. "Ms. Morton," he greeted smoothly, his voice deep, deliberate, designed to make every word land like scripture. Clara stepped forward, hiding the way her pulse kicked up. Ethan Vale wasn't just a speaker. He was an idea. He had built an empire on rags to riches mythology. The self-made man who clawed his way out of poverty and despair, only to rise as one of the most influential figures in the world. Millions hung on his words, filling stadiums to hear him deliver his gospel of success and resilience. And yet, something felt off. She'd spent weeks dissecting his past, combing through interviews, books, and speeches. On the surface, Ethan's story was flawless. Too flawless. Certain details repeated too perfectly, as if rehearsed. Some facts didn't align. His childhood home, his education, the so-called defining moments that had shaped him. If there was one thing Clara had learned in investigative journalism, it was this: when a story is too perfect, it's usually a lie. She took a seat across from him, setting her notebook and recorder on the glass tabletop. Ethan smiled, a perfect, PR-trained expression that reached his eyes just enough to seem authentic. "Shall we begin?" he said. Clara hit record. "Your book, Unbreakable: The Path to Greatness, has been a global success," she started, keeping her voice neutral. "You've helped millions, but a lot of people wonder, who is Ethan Vale when the cameras aren't rolling?" A soft chuckle. A shift in posture, just enough to look at ease without seeming rehearsed. "I'm exactly who I say I am," Ethan said, his tone as smooth as silk. A man who refused to let his circumstances define him. "Your story is one of struggle, abandonment, foster care, homelessness. And yet, some records of your childhood seem difficult to verify." Ethan tilted his head, the slightest flicker of something, annoyance? Calculation? Crossing his eyes. Clara pressed on. "Your birth certificate was sealed. Your former classmates? None seem to remember you. Even the foster home you mentioned in Unbreakable doesn't appear in public records." A pause. Then, Ethan's smile widened, effortless, like a magician about to reveal a trick. "Do you believe everything you read, Clara?" The way he said her name made the hairs on her arms lift. No, she admitted, leaning forward. That's why I investigate. Another chuckle. This time, more amused than warm. Let me tell you something about truth. He steepled his fingers, fixing her with a gaze so unshakable it felt engineered. People don't want reality, he continued. They want a story they can believe in. A story that inspires them. And sometimes. He exhaled, tilting his head slightly. Facts get in the way of the bigger picture. Clara kept her expression unreadable, but inside, something coiled tight. That sounds a lot like lying, she said. Ethan held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then, he laughed, a rich, velvety sound that sent unease creeping down her spine. Lies? No, no. He shook his head, as if indulging a child's naivety. I deal in truth that matters. The truth people need. Because here's the secret, Clara. He leaned forward. Truth isn't about facts. It's about belief. The strongest truth is the one people refuse to question. A flicker of something dark, deliberate behind his eyes. Clara swallowed. This wasn't the conversation she had prepared for. She had expected evasiveness, maybe scripted charm. But this was something else entirely. A man who didn't fear the lie, he controlled it. She glanced at her recorder, the red light blinking. Every instinct in her screamed that this was dangerous territory, that she was staring at a carefully manufactured illusion, one that, if disrupted, could shatter in ways she wasn't ready for. She had more questions. Who made Ethan Vale? Who was protecting him? But one thing was certain, this was only the beginning. Outside the towering windows, the city stretched endlessly below. But inside, Clara had the sinking feeling that she was trapped in something far bigger than she understood. And Ethan Vale knew it. As Clara leaves the office, her phone buzzes with a new email. No subject. No sender. Just 2 words. Stop digging. She looks up, scanning the sleek, corporate hallway. A security guard watches her from the far end. She turns to glance back at Ethan Vale's door. It's already closed. Her fingers tighten around her phone. Somewhere deep in her gut, she knows, this isn't just an interview anymore. It's a warning. Chapter 2. The contradiction. The dim glow of Clara's laptop screen cast shifting shadows across the cluttered desk. The city hummed outside her apartment window, distant sirens, the occasional car horn, but she barely heard it. Everything faded into background noise as she stared at the article on her screen, her heart pounding in slow, deliberate beats. The headline was unremarkable, buried in the archives of a small-town newspaper from 1993. Local businessman donates to orphanage in Riverside County. A grainy black and white photo accompanied the piece, showing a smiling couple in their late 40s handing over a check to the orphanage director. Behind them, a boy stood, tall, lean, confident. Clara zoomed in, her breath catching. Ethan Vale. Or at least, someone who looked exactly like him. She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of her desk. The boy in the photo wasn't the poor, abandoned child Ethan described in his book. He wasn't in a foster home, struggling to survive. He was standing next to the couple, holding their hands. Not a foster kid. A son. Clara's pulse kicked up. This didn't make sense. Ethan had spoken at length about growing up in poverty, shuffled between foster homes, his childhood a cycle of abandonment and struggle. It was the foundation of his entire persona. The driving force behind his message. And yet, here he was, standing beside what looked very much like his biological parents, in a setting far removed from the harsh upbringing he claimed. Clara leaned back, pressing her fingers against her temples. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe this was a coincidence, a boy who just happened to resemble him. Maybe the article was wrong, misidentifying him. Or maybe, Ethan Vale wasn't who he said he was. A sharp buzz rattled her desk. Her phone. She jumped, her nerves already stretched tight. Unknown caller. She hesitated before answering. Clara Morton. Silence. Faint breathing. Then, a click. The line went dead. Clara exhaled, shaking off the chill crawling up her spine. She turned back to the screen, staring at the article as if she could will it to change. It didn't. She reached for her notebook, flipping to the page where she had scribbled Ethan's exact words from the interview. I never knew stability as a child. I went from home to home, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. I had to build myself from nothing. A lie. A deliberate, calculated lie. She clicked back to the newspaper database and typed in the name of the orphanage mentioned in the article. No results. Clara frowned, refining the search. Nothing. The orphanage didn't exist. Her stomach twisted. The article was real, but the orphanage was a ghost. Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard. If she had been uncertain before, she wasn't anymore. Something was very, very wrong with Ethan Vale's story. She pulled up his birth records. Sealed. His education history. Incomplete. Everything about his past was meticulously curated, just enough information to build a story, but not enough to be verified. Clara knew how these things worked. She had investigated enough fabricated identities, rewritten pasts, and corporate cover-ups to recognize a controlled narrative when she saw one. But this wasn't just damage control. This was a man built from the ground up. A carefully manufactured persona. She swallowed, adrenaline prickling at the edges of her thoughts. Ethan Vale wasn't just lying about his past. Someone had erased it. A sudden knock on the door sent her heart slamming against her ribs. She twisted toward the sound, pulse spiking. She wasn't expecting anyone. Another knock, sharp, deliberate. Clara's mouth went dry. She glanced at her phone, then at the laptop screen, where Ethan's smiling face stared back at her from a staged press photo. She had only just started digging. And already, someone was at her door. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man stood outside. Dark suit. No expression. Something cold coiled in her gut. She didn't open the door. Instead, she stepped back, reaching for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, ready to dial. Before she could, a slip of paper slid under the door. She stared at it. Just 2 words. Stop now. Clara's breath came short, uneven. She bent down, picked up the note, and turned it over. No signature. No markings. Just a direct order. And a warning. She straightened, her grip tightening. She wasn't stopping. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 3. The first doubt. The newsroom smelled of burnt coffee and ink. The usual hum of conversation, clacking keyboards, and ringing phones filled the air, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was still spinning with the article, the orphanage that didn't exist, and the photo of a young Ethan Vale that shouldn't have been possible. She stood outside Paul Henderson's office, gripping her notebook so tight the edges curled under her fingers. Her editor had seen it all: scandals, fraud, political cover-ups, but Ethan Vale wasn't just another exposé. He was a brand, a movement, an empire. And Clara was about to suggest that empire was built on a lie. She knocked once before pushing the door open. Paul sat behind his cluttered desk, glasses perched low on his nose as he skimmed a proof. He didn't look up. "This better be good, Morton," he muttered, scribbling something in red ink. "It's about Ethan Vale." That got his attention. Paul sighed, leaning back. "Jesus, Clara, you're on this again?" She stepped forward, dropping the printed newspaper article onto his desk. "Look at this. That's Ethan Vale, 1993, standing next to a couple he never mentioned in any interview or book. He claims he grew up in foster care, but this," she tapped the page, pulse quickening, "suggests he wasn't a foster kid at all." Paul barely glanced at it. "So what?" Clara blinked. "So what? His entire story is a fraud, Paul. The man is worth billions. He's sold a myth to millions of people. If this photo is real, it means he lied about his childhood, about his struggles. About everything." Paul sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're not getting it. It doesn't matter." Clara recoiled. "What?" "This guy isn't a politician. He's not embezzling funds. He's a motivational speaker. People don't follow him for facts. They follow him for inspiration. Whether or not his past is accurate doesn't change the impact he's had." Clara's stomach twisted. "You're saying the truth doesn't matter?" "I'm saying the perception of truth is what matters." Paul leaned forward, his expression hard. "This story? It's career suicide. Ethan Vale has an army of lawyers, PR teams, and fans who will bury you alive. You have proof he stole money? No. Evidence of abuse? No. All you have is an old newspaper clipping and a hunch. No one's going to touch this, Morton." Clara bristled. "So we let him keep lying. We let people believe what they want." Paul shook his head. "You're a damn good reporter, Clara, but this? It's a dead end. Drop it." Silence hung between them. Her editor, a man who had chased truth his entire career, was telling her to look the other way. Clara stood, grabbing the article off his desk. "Fine." Paul watched her, knowing that tone. "Clara." "I said fine." She walked out before he could press further. The research that shouldn't exist. Back at her desk, Clara wasn't fine. Her hands shook with frustration as she logged into the archives again. Paul might have given up, but she wasn't walking away. She started with Ethan's high school records. Nothing. That didn't make sense. Every public figure had a paper trail, yearbooks, alumni interviews, records of some kind. But Ethan Vale? Blank. She leaned closer, scanning through every school in the state he claimed to have attended. Still nothing. She widened the search. Private schools. Military academies. Alternative education programs. Still nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. That wasn't just unusual. That was impossible. It wasn't that Ethan's records were missing, it was as if they had been erased. She clicked back to her notes, scrolling through his past interviews. In an early profile, he had casually mentioned playing varsity basketball in high school. She switched to sports records. Scanned every team roster from the years Ethan would have attended. His name wasn't on a single one. Clara exhaled sharply. He was lying. She didn't just suspect it now, she knew. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed in one more search. Ethan Vale birth certificate. A loading screen. Then, restricted record. Her stomach dropped. Why would a motivational speaker have a sealed birth record? Her chest tightened. Someone, somewhere, didn't want anyone digging into his past. She reached for her phone, her pulse hammering. The dial tone buzzed once. Twice. Then. Hello? Hey, Nick, she said, forcing calm into her voice. I need a favor. Nick Devlin was a former investigative journalist turned independent researcher. If anyone could find buried records, it was him. Tell me it's something fun, Nick said. Clara hesitated. It's about Ethan Vale. Silence. Then, a low whistle. Shit, Morton, you sure you want to go down that rabbit hole? I think someone already wiped his school records, she said, scanning the restricted file notice still glowing on her screen. And his birth certificate is sealed. Nick's tone changed. That's not normal. No, she agreed, cold realization creeping up her spine. It's not. A beat of silence. Then, Nick said, send me what you have. I'll see what I can find. Clara nodded, already compiling her notes. But deep down, she knew she had just crossed a line. Clara was still typing when her screen flickered. A pop-up appeared. Unauthorized access detected. Your session has been terminated. Her stomach lurched. Before she could react, her phone vibrated with a new email. No sender. No subject. Just a single attachment. She clicked it open, her breath catching. A photo of herself, sitting at her desk, taken from somewhere behind her. 2 words in bold. Stop now. Clara turned, her chest tightening. The window behind her reflected an empty room. But suddenly, she wasn't sure if she was alone anymore.